Hello, 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 hello. Welcome to Storytime with Moog. I am Moog, and today we are reading The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells, starting with Chapter 9. But first, recap. Today, we are starting with Chapter 9 of The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. So, what has happened so far? Well, I forgot our name, but main character, were shipwrecked, and then we were picked up by another ship. We woke up, the doctor tended to our wounds, everything like that. We woke up, we're still a little foggy, and the crew are a little weird. This one guy has a muzzle, but it's also dark, so we can't really tell. There's a lot of weird animals being transported, like pumas and stuff like that. And the captain hates everything about this journey. It's more than he bargained for. So he's just drunkenly, yelling at everybody. And then we get to the island of where the cargo is supposed to be going. And the captain is now kicking us, the narrator, off because we're not part of this planned thing. But there's no room on the ship with all of the animals to go to the island. So we're in our little dinghy and we're being dragged to the island behind. And we're on the island. We do meet Dr. Moreau, but we don't know who that is initially. And Dr. Moreau and his assistant are going back and forth about whether or not we can stay and whether or not they can tell us anything. And it's like, well, we are into sciences. And he's like, maybe we can tell you all of our secrets. And so instead of telling all of the secrets, what a great idea, but to put us in a room that is right next to all of the secrets. And the secrets are very loud. The animals are just screaming in pain. So, something is afoot. Oh no, no pun intended. Oh, that was bad. And also, we realize that we do remember the name Dr. Moreau. He was a huge vivisector, that was his area of study, and he got in trouble 10 years ago when one of the creatures that he was experimenting on escaped, and it was disgusting. And so they kicked him out of London, and now apparently this is where he is, and he is still continuing his work. And yeah, I'm super enjoying this. I have not read this book before, but I have seen the Simpsons episode that definitely parodies this, and just knowing pop cultural things about it without actually having to have read it. So I'm excited to see the little things that didn't necessarily make it through to other adaptations, or finding other tropes and things that we still use today in this story, which is always a fun treat. Chapter 9. The Thing in the Forest. I strode through the undergrowth that clothed the ridge behind the house, scarcely heeding whither I went, passed on through the shadow of a thick cluster of straight-stemmed trees beyond it, and so presently found myself some way on the other side of the ridge and descending towards a streamlet that ran through a narrow valley. I paused and listened. The distance I had come, or the intervening masses of thicket, deadened any sound that might be coming from the enclosure. The air was still. Then, with a rustle, a rabbit emerged and went scampering up the slope before me. I hesitated and sat down in the edge of the shade. The place was a pleasant one. The rivulet was hidden by the luxuriant vegetation of the banks, save at one point where I caught a triangular patch of its glittering water. On the farther side, I saw through a bluish haze a tangle of trees and creepers, and above these again the luminous blue of the sky. Here and there a splash of white or crimson marked the blooming of some trailing epiphyte. I let my eyes wander over this scene for a while, and then began to turn over in my mind again the strange peculiarities of Montgomery's man. But it was too hot to think elaborately, and presently I fell into a tranquil state, midway between dozing and waking. From this I was roused, after I know not how long, by a rustling amidst the greenery on the other side of the stream. For a moment I could see nothing but the waving summits of the ferns and reeds. Then suddenly upon the bank of the stream appeared something. At first I could not distinguish what it was. It bowed its round head to the water and began to drink. Then I saw it was a man, going on all fours like a beast. He was clothed in bluish cloth, and was of a copper-colored hue, with black hair. It seemed that grotesque ugliness was an invariable character of these islanders. I could hear the suck of the water at his lips as he drank. I leant forward to see him better, and a piece of lava, detached by my hand, went pattering down the slope. He looked up guiltily, and his eyes met mine. Forthwith, he scrambled to his feet and stood wiping his clumsy hands across his mouth and regarding me. His legs were scarcely half the length of his body. So, staring one another out of countenance, we remained for perhaps the space of a minute. Then, stopping to look back once or twice, he slunk off among the bushes to the right of me, and I heard the swish of the fronds grow faint in the distance and die away. Long after, he had disappeared. I remained sitting up, staring in the direction of his retreat. My drowsy tranquility had gone. I was startled by a noise behind me, and turning suddenly saw the flapping white tail of a rabbit vanishing up the slope. I jumped to my feet. The apparition of this grotesque, half-bestial creature had suddenly populated the stillness of the afternoon for me. I looked around me rather nervously, and regretted that I was unarmed. Then I thought that the man I had just seen had been clothed in bluish cloth, had not been naked as a savage would have been, and I tried to persuade myself from that fact that he was, after all, probably a peaceful character, that the dull ferocity of his countenance belied him. Yet, I was greatly disturbed at the apparition. I walked to the left along the slope, turning my head about and peering this way and that among the straight stems of the trees. Why should a man go on all fours and drink with his lips? Presently I heard an animal wailing again, and taking it to be the puma, I turned about and walked in a direction diametrically opposite to the sound. This led me down to the stream, across which I stepped and pushed my way through the undergrowth beyond. I was startled by a great patch of vivid scarlet on the ground, and going up to it found it to be a peculiar fungus, branched and corrugated like a fallacious lichen, but deliquescing into slime at the touch. And then in the shadow of some luxuriant ferns I came upon an unpleasant thing, the dead body of a rabbit covered with shining flies, but still warm, and with the head torn off. I stopped, aghast at the sight of the scattered blood. Here, at least, was one visitor to the island disposed of. There were no traces of other violence about. It looked as though it had been suddenly snatched up and killed, and as I stared at the little furry body, came the difficulty of how the thing had been done. The vague dread that had been in my mind since I had seen the inhuman face of the man at the stream grew distincter as I stood there. I began to realize the hardihood of my expedition among these unknown people. The thicket about me became altered to my imagination. Every shadow became something more than a shadow, became an ambush. Every rustle became a threat. Invisible things seemed watching me. I resolved to go back to the enclosure on the beach I suddenly turned away and thrust myself violently, possibly even frantically, through the bushes, anxious to get a clear space about me again. I stopped, just in time to prevent myself emerging upon an open space. It was a kind of glade in the forest made by a fall. Seedlings were already startling up to struggle for the vacant space, and beyond, the dense growth of stems and twining vines and splashes of fungus and flowers closed in again. Before me, squatting together upon the fungoid ruins of a huge fallen tree and still unaware of my approach, were 3 grotesque human figures. One was evidently female, and the other 2 were men. They were naked, save for the swathing of scarlet cloth about the middle, and their skins were of a dull, pinkish drab color, such as I had never seen in no savages before. They had fat, heavy, chinless faces, retreating foreheads, and a scant, bristly hair upon their heads. I never saw such bestial-looking creatures. They were talking, or at least one of the men was talking to the other 2, and all 3 had been too closely interested to heed the rustling of my approach. They swayed their heads and shoulders from side to side. The speaker's words came thick and sloppy, and though I could hear them distinctly, I could not distinguish what he said. He seemed to me to be reciting some complicated gibberish. Presently, his articulation became shriller, and spreading his hands, he rose to his feet. At that, the others began to gibber in unison, also rising to their feet, spreading their hands and swaying their bodies in rhythm with their chant. I noticed then the abnormal shortness of their legs and their lank, clumsy feet. All 3 began slowly to circle round, raising and stamping their feet and waving their arms. A kind of tune crept into their rhythmic recitation, and a refrain, Alula, or Balula, it sounded like. Their eyes began to sparkle, and their ugly faces to brighten with an expression of strange pleasure. Saliva dripped from their lipless mouths. Suddenly, as I watched their grotesque and unaccountable gestures, I perceived clearly for the first time what it was that had offended me, what had given me the 2 inconsistent and conflicting impressions of utter strangeness and yet of the strangest familiarity. The 3 creatures engaged in this mysterious rite were human in shape, and yet human beings with the strangest air about them of some familiar animal. Each of these creatures, despite its human form, its rag of clothing, and the rough humanity of its bodily form, had woven into it, into its movements, into the expression of its countenance, into its whole presence, some now irresistible suggestion of a hog, a swinish taint, an unmistakable mark of the beast. I stood overcome by this amazing realization, and then the most horrible questionings came rushing into my mind. They began leaping in the air, first one, then the other, whooping and grunting. Then one slipped, and for a moment was on all 4s, to recover indeed forthwith. But that transitory gleam of the true animalism of these monsters was enough. I turned as noiselessly as possible, and becoming every now and then rigid with the fear of being discovered, as a branch cracked or a leaf rustled, I pushed back into the bushes. It was long before I grew bolder and dared to move freely. My only idea for the moment was to get away from these foul beings, and I scarcely noticed that I had emerged upon a faint pathway amidst the trees. Then suddenly traversing a little glade, I saw with an unpleasant start 2 clumsy legs among the trees, walking with noiseless footsteps parallel with my course, and perhaps 30 yards away from me. The head and upper part of the body were hidden by a tangle of creeper. I stopped abruptly, hoping the creature did not see me. The feet stopped, as I did. So nervous was I that I controlled an impulse to headlong flight with the utmost difficulty. Then, looking hard, I distinguished through the interlacing network the head and body of the brute I had seen drinking. He moved his head. There was an emerald flash in his eyes as he glanced at me from the shadow of the trees, a half-luminous color that vanished as he turned his head again. He was motionless for a moment, and then with a noiseless tread began running through the green confusion. In another moment he had vanished behind some bushes. I could not see him, but I felt that he had stopped and was watching me again. What on earth was he? Man or beast? What did he want with me? I had no weapon, not even a stick. Flight would be madness. At any rate, the thing, whatever it was, lacked the courage to attack me. Setting my teeth hard, I walked straight towards him. I was anxious not to show the fear that seemed chilling my backbone. I pushed through a tangle of tall, white-flowered bushes and saw him 20 paces beyond, looking over his shoulder at me and hesitating. I advanced a step or two, looking steadfastly into his eyes. "Who are you?" said I. He tried to meet my gaze. "No," he said suddenly, and turning went bounding away from me through the undergrowth. Then he turned and stared at me again. His eyes shone brightly out of the dusk under the trees. My heart was in my mouth, but I felt my only chance was bluff and walked steadily towards him. He turned again and vanished into the dusk. Once more, I thought I caught the glint of his eyes, and that was all. For the first time, I realized how the lateness of the hour might affect me. The sun had set some minutes since. The swift dusk of the tropics was already fading out of the eastern sky, and a pioneer moth fluttered silently by my head. Unless I would spend the night among the unknown dangers of the mysterious forest, I must hasten back to the enclosure. The thought of a return to that pain-haunted refuge was extremely disagreeable, but still more so was the idea of being overtaken in the open by darkness, and all that darkness might conceal. I gave one more look into the blue shadows that had swallowed up this odd creature, and then retraced my way back down the slope towards the stream, going, as I judged, in the direction from which I had come. I walked eagerly, my mind confused with many things, and presently found myself in a level place among scattered trees. The colorless clearness that comes after the sunset flush was darkling. The blue sky above grew momentarily deeper, and the little stars, one by one, pierced the attenuated light. The interspaces of the trees, the gaps in the further vegetation that had been hazy blue in the daylight, grew black and mysterious. I pushed on. The color vanished from the world. The treetops rose against the luminous blue sky in inky silhouette, and all below that outline melted into one formless blackness. Presently the trees grew thinner, and the shrubby undergrowth more abundant. Then there was a desolate space covered with a white sand, and then another expanse of tangled bushes. I did not remember crossing the sand opening before. I began to be tormented by a faint rustling upon my right hand. I thought at first it was fancy, for whenever I stopped there was silence, save for the evening breeze in the treetops. Then when I turned to hurry on again, there was an echo to my footsteps. I turned away from the thickets, keeping to the more open ground and endeavoring by sudden turns now and then to surprise something in the act of creeping upon me. I saw nothing, and nevertheless my sense of another presence grew steadily. I increased my pace, and after some time came to a slight ridge, crossed it, and turned sharply, regarding it steadfastly from the further side. It came out black and clear-cut against the darkling sky, and presently a shapeless lump heaved up momentarily against the skyline and vanished again. I felt assured, now that my tawny-faced antagonist was stalking me once more, and coupled with that was another unpleasant realization that I had lost my way. For a time I hurried on hopelessly perplexed and pursued by that stealthy approach. Whatever it was, the thing either lacked the courage to attack me, or it was waiting to take me at some disadvantage. I kept studiously to the open. At times I would turn and listen, and presently I had half persuaded myself that my pursuer had abandoned the chase, or was a mere creation of my disordered imagination. Then I heard the sound of the sea. I quickened my footsteps almost into a run, and immediately there was a stumble in my rear. I turned suddenly and stared at the uncertain trees behind me. One black shadow seemed to leap into another. I listened, rigid, and heard nothing but the creep of the blood in my ears. I thought that my nerves were unstrung, and that my imagination was tricking me, and turned resolutely towards the sound of the sea again. In a minute or so the trees grew thinner, and I emerged upon a bare, low headland running out into the somber water. The night was calm and clear, and the reflection of the growing multitude of the stars shivered in the tranquil heaving of the sea. Some way out, the wash upon an irregular band of reef shone with a pallid light of its own. Westward, I saw the zodiacal light mingling with the yellow brilliance of the evening star. The coast fell away from me to the east, and westward it was hidden by the shoulder of the cape. Then I recalled the fact that Moreau's beach lay to the west. A twig snapped behind me, and there was a rustle. I turned and stood facing the dark trees. I could see nothing, or else I could see too much. Every dark form in the dimness had its ominous quality, its peculiar suggestion of alert watchfulness. So I stood for perhaps a minute, and then, with an eye to the trees still, turned westward to cross the headland. And as I moved, one among the lurking shadows moved to follow me. My heart beat quickly. Presently the broad sweep of a bay to the westward became visible, and I halted again. The noiseless shadow halted a dozen yards from me. A little point of light shone on the further bend of the curve, and the gray sweep of the sandy beach lay faint under the starlight. Perhaps 2 miles away was that little point of light. To get to the beach, I should have to go through the trees where the shadows lurked and down a bushy slope. I could see the thing rather more distinctly now. It was no animal, for it stood erect. At that, I opened my mouth to speak and found a hoarse phlegm choked my voice. I tried again and shouted, "Who is there?" There was no answer. I advanced a step. The thing did not move, only gathered itself together. My foot struck a stone. That gave me an idea. Without taking my eyes off the black form before me, I stooped and picked up this lump of rock, but at my motion the thing turned abruptly, as a dog might have done, and slunk obliquely into the further darkness. Then I recalled a schoolboy expedient against big dogs, and twisted the rock into my handkerchief, and gave this a turn round my wrist. I heard a movement further off among the shadows, as if the thing was in retreat. Then suddenly, my tense excitement gave way. I broke into a profuse perspiration and fell a-trembling, with my adversary routed and this weapon in my hand. It was some time before I could summon resolution to go down through the trees and bushes upon the flank of the headland to the beach. At last, I did it at a run, and as I emerged from the thicket upon the sand, I heard some other body come crashing after me. At that, I completely lost my head with fear and began running along the sand. Forthwith, there came the swift patter of soft feet in pursuit. I gave a wild cry and redoubled my pace. Some dim, black things, about 3 or 4 times the size of rabbits, went running or hopping up from the beach towards the bushes as I passed. As long as I live, I shall remember the terror of that chase. I ran near the water's edge and heard every now and then the splash of the feet that gained upon me. Far away, hopelessly far, was the yellow light. All the night about us was black and still. Splash, splash, came the pursuing feet nearer and nearer. I felt my breath going, for I was quite out of training. It whooped as I drew it, and I felt a pain like a knife in my side. I perceived the thing would come up with me long before I reached the enclosure, and, desperate and sobbing for my breath, I wheeled round upon it and struck at it as it came up to me, struck with all of my strength. The stone came out of the sling of the handkerchief as I did so. As I turned, the thing, which had been running on all fours, rose to its feet, and the missile fell fair on its left temple. The skull rang loud, and the animal man blundered into me, thrust me back with its hands, and went staggering past me to fall headlong upon the sand with its face in the water. And there it lay still. I could not bring myself to approach that black heap. I left it there, with the water rippling round it, under the still stars, and giving it a wide berth, pursued my way towards the yellow glow of the house, and presently, with a positive effect of relief, came the pitiful moan of the puma, the sound that had originally driven me out to explore this mysterious island. At that, though I was faint and horribly fatigued, I gathered together all my strength and began running again towards the light. I thought I heard a voice calling me. End of chapter 9. Okay, so chapter 9, we are exploring the island because of the screaming puma that is right next to where we're staying. So we're exploring the island, and as we do so, we are just coming across creatures. An unfamiliar island, by ourselves, with barely any trails, in the dark. And so we already know things are weird and things are happening. I don't know, my brain stopped working in that moment. But why we think it's a good idea to explore by ourselves in darkness, I don't know. But we do. And wouldn't you know it, we're scared. And we are being chased. Well, first we see 3 human hybrids that we don't understand at all. And then we are being chased by a really tall, shadowy, we can't really see what it is, and we weaponize ourselves. We have a handkerchief, we tie a rock in it, and then when it gets close enough to us, we fling it, the rock leaves our handkerchief, and it just crushes the skull of whatever this creature is, and the creature just lands face down into the water dead. So we just committed murder for this animal human hybrid, and it might not even wanted to hurt us, you know? I understand being scared, though. If I was in that position, I would also be scared. But also, if I was in that position, I would not be in that position. So, Chapter 10. The Crying of the Man. As I drew near the house, I saw that the light shone from the open door of my room. And then I heard coming out from the darkness at the side of that orange oblong of light the voice of Montgomery shouting, "Prendick!" I continued running. Presently I heard him again. I replied in a feeble, "Hello?" and in another moment had staggered up to him. "Where have you been?" said he, holding me at arm's length so that the light from the door fell on my face. We have both been so busy that we forgot you until about half an hour ago." He led me into the room and sat me down in the deck chair. For a while I was blinded by the light. "We did not think you would start to explore this island of ours without telling us," he said. And then, "I was afraid, but..." "What? Hello?" My last remaining strength slipped from me, and my head fell forward on my chest. I think he found a certain satisfaction in giving me brandy. "For God's sake," said I, "fasten that door." "You've been meeting some of our curiosities, eh?" said he. He locked the door and turned to me again. He asked me no questions, but gave me some more brandy and water and pressed me to eat. I was in a state of collapse. He said something vague about his forgetting to warn me and asked me briefly when I left the house and what I had seen. I answered him as briefly, in fragmentary sentences. "Tell me what it all means," said I, in a state bordering on hysterics. "It's nothing so very dreadful," said he, "but I think you have had about enough for one day." The puma suddenly gave a sharp yell of pain. At that he swore under his breath. "I'm damned," he said, "if this place is not as bad as Gower Street with its cats." "Montgomery," said I, "what was that thing that came after me? Was it a beast, or was it a man?" "If you don't sleep tonight," he said, "you'll be off your head tomorrow." I stood up in front of him. "What was that thing that came after me?" I asked. He looked me squarely in the eyes and twisted his mouth askew. His eyes, which had seemed animated a minute before, went dull. "From your account," he said, "I'm thinking it was a boggle." I felt a gust of intense irritation, which passed as quickly as it came. I flung myself into the chair again and pressed my hands on my forehead. The puma began once more. Montgomery came round behind me and put his hand on my shoulder. "Look here, Prendick," he said. "I had no business to let you drift out into this silly island of ours. But it's not so bad as you feel, man. Your nerves are worked to rags. Let me give you something that will make you sleep. That will keep on for hours yet. You must simply get to sleep, or I won't answer for it." I did not reply. I bowed forward and covered my face with my hands. Presently, he returned with a small measure containing a dark liquid. This he gave me. I took it unresistingly, and he helped me into the hammock. When I awoke, it was broad daylight. For a little while I lay flat, staring at the roof above me. The rafters, I observed, were made out of the timbers of a ship. Then I turned my head and saw a meal prepared for me on the table. I perceived that I was hungry, and prepared to clamber out of the hammock, which, very politely anticipating my intention, twisted round and deposited me upon all fours on the floor. I got up and sat down before the food. I had a heavy feeling in my head, and only the vaguest memory at first of the things that had happened overnight. The morning breeze blew very pleasantly through the unglazed window, and the food contributed to the sense of animal comfort which I experienced. Presently the door behind me, the door inward towards the yard of the enclosure, opened. I turned and saw Montgomery's face. "All right," said he. "I'm frightfully busy," and he shut the door. Afterwards I discovered that he forgot to relock it. Then I recalled the expression of his face the previous night, and with that the memory of all I had experienced reconstructed itself before me. Even as that fear came back to me, it came a cry from within. But that time it was not the cry of a puma. I put down the mouthful that hesitated upon my lips and listened. Silence, save for the whisper of the morning breeze. I began to think my ears had deceived me. After a long pause, I resumed my meal, but with my ears still vigilant. Presently, I heard something else, very faint and low. I sat as if frozen in my attitude. Though it was faint and low, it moved me more profoundly than all that I had hitherto heard of the abominations behind the wall. There was no mistake this time in the quality of the dim, broken sounds, no doubt at all of their source, for it was groaning, broken by sobs and gasps of anguish. It was no brute this time. It was a human being in torture. As I realized this, I rose and in 3 steps had crossed the room, seized the handle of the door into the yard, and flung it open before me. "Prendick, man, stop!" cried Montgomery, intervening. A startled deerhound yelped and snarled. There was blood, I saw, in the sink, brown and some scarlet, and I smelt the peculiar smell of carbolic acid. Then through an open doorway beyond, in the dim light of the shadow, I saw something bound painfully upon a framework, scarred, red, and bandaged. And then blotting this out appeared the face of old Moreau, white and terrible. In a moment he had gripped me by the shoulder with a hand that was smeared blood, had twisted me off my feet, and flung me headlong back into my own room. He lifted me as though I was a little child. I fell at full length upon the floor, and the door slammed and shut out the passionate intensity of his face. Then I heard the key turn in the lock, and Montgomery's voice in expostulation. "Ruin the work of a lifetime," I heard Moreau say. "He does not understand," said Montgomery, and other things that were inaudible. "I can't spare the time yet," said Moreau. The rest I did not hear. I picked myself up and stood trembling, my mind a chaos of the most horrible misgivings. Could it be possible, I thought, that such a thing as the vivisection of men was carried on here? The question shot like lightning across a tumultuous sky, and suddenly the clouded horror of my mind condensed into a vivid realization of my own danger. End of chapter 10. All right, so we ran through the forest, we get back home, we find Montgomery. Montgomery is like, "What did you see? Why did you do this? We forgot you were even here until 30 minutes ago." And so we are all shook up. Yeah. And so we describe what happened, and we're asking for questions. Was it a man? Was it a beast? What did we see? And Montgomery's like, "You need to calm down. You need to have some water, have something to eat, get some sleep, and just calm yourself." And so he's like, "Yeah, I'll answer your questions tomorrow." And so we go to sleep, and we wake up, and we open the door to go out, and Montgomery is there and slams the door shut and is like, "Not now." Closes the door, but doesn't lock it. So we go out. Well, he doesn't lock it. We're eating breakfast, and we hear screams, but they're not animal screams. They are definitely human screams. And so we run outside. We run to where the screams are, and we just see like an absolute scene of horror. There's just blood everywhere. We're not really sure what is happening, but it's not good. And Dr. Moreau is there and is just livid that we've walked in through this. And Montgomery shoves us out, and Montgomery is like, he doesn't understand. And Moreau is like, "This is my life's work. It's all going to be ruined because of him." And then we have a thought like, maybe I'm in danger. And that's where the chapter ended. Chapter 11. The Hunting of the Man. It came before my mind with an unreasonable hope of escape that the outer door of my room was still open to me. I was convinced now, absolutely assured, that Moreau had been vivisecting a human being. All the time since I had heard his name, I had been trying to link in my mind in some way the grotesque animalism of the islanders with his abominations, and now I thought I saw it all. The memory of his work of the transfusion of blood recurred to me. These creatures I had seen were the victims of some hideous experiment. These sickening scoundrels had merely intended to keep me back, to fool me with their display of confidence, and presently to fall upon me with a fate more horrible than death, with torture, and after torture the most hideous degradation it is possible to conceive, to send me off a lost soul, a beast, to the rest of their common route. I looked round for some weapon. Nothing. Then, with an inspiration, I turned over the deck chair, put my foot on the side of it, and tore away the side rail. It happened that a nail came away with the wood, and projecting gave a touch of danger to an otherwise petty weapon. I heard a step outside, and incontinently flung open the door and found Montgomery within a yard of it. He meant to lock the outer door. I raised this nail stick of mine and cut at his face, but he sprang back. I hesitated a moment, then turned and fled round the corner of the house. "Prendick, man!" I heard his astonished cry. "Don't be a silly ass, man!" Another minute, thought I, and he would have had me locked in, and as ready as a hospital rabbit for my fate. He emerged behind the corner, for I heard him shout, "Prendick!" And he began to run after me, shouting things as he ran. This time, running blindly, I went northeastward in a direction at right angles to my previous expedition. Once, as I went round headlong up the beach, I glanced over my shoulder and saw his attendant with him. I ran furiously up the slope, over it, then turning eastward along a rocky valley fringed on either side with jungle, I ran for perhaps a mile altogether, my chest straining, my heart beating in my ears, and then hearing nothing of Montgomery or his man, and feeling upon the verge of exhaustion, I doubled sharply back towards the beach as I judged, and lay down in the shelter of a canebrake. There I remained for a long time, too fearful to move, and indeed too fearful even to plan a course of action. The wild scene about me lay sleeping silently under the sun, and the only sound near me was the thin hum of some small gnats that had discovered me. Presently I became aware of a drowsy breathing sound, the soughing of the sea upon the beach. After about an hour, I heard Montgomery shouting my name, far away to the north. That set me thinking of my plan of action. As I interpreted it then, this island was inhabited only by these two vivisectors and their animalized victims. Some of these, no doubt, they could press into their service against me if need arose. I knew both Moreau and Montgomery carried revolvers, and save for a feeble bar of deal spiked with a small nail, the merest mockery of a mace, I was unarmed. So I lay still there until I began to think of food and drink, and at that thought, the real hopelessness of my position came home to me. I knew no way of getting anything to eat. I was too ignorant of botany to discover any resort of root or fruit that might lay about me. I had no means of trapping the few rabbits upon the island. I grew blanker the more I turned the prospect over. At last, the desperation of my position, my mind turned to the animal men I had encountered. I tried to find some hope in what I remembered of them. In turn, I recalled each one I had seen and tried to draw some augury of assistance from my memory. Then suddenly I heard a staghound bay, and at that realized a new danger. I took little time to think, or they would have caught me then, but snatching up my nailed stick, rushed headlong from my hiding place towards the sounds of the sea. I remember a growth of thorny plants with spines that stabbed like penknives. I emerged bleeding and with torn clothes upon the lip of a long creek opening northward. I went straight into the water without a minute's hesitation, wading up the creek and presently finding myself knee-deep in a little stream. I scrambled out at last on the westward bank and, with my heart beating loudly in my ears, crept into a tangle of ferns to await the issue. I heard the dog, there was only one, draw nearer and yelp when it came to the thorns. Then I heard no more, and presently began to think I had escaped. The minutes passed. The silence lengthened out. And at last, after an hour of security, my courage began to return to me. By this time, I was no longer very much terrified or very miserable. I had, as it were, passed the limit of terror and despair. I felt now that my life was practically lost, and that persuasion made me capable of daring anything. I had even a certain wish to encounter Moreau face to face, and as I had waded into the water, I remembered that if I were too hard pressed, at least one path of escape from torment will lay open to me. They could not very well prevent my drowning myself. I had half a mind to drown myself then, but an odd wish to see the whole adventure out, a queer, impersonal, spectacular interest in myself, restrained me. I stretched my limbs, sore and painful from the pricks of the spiny plants, and stared around me at the trees, and so suddenly that it seemed to jump out of the green tracery about it, my eyes lit upon a face watching me. I saw that it was the simian creature who had met the launch upon the beach. He was clinging to the oblique stem of a palm tree. I gripped my stick and stood up, facing him. He began chattering. You, was all I could distinguish at first. Suddenly he dropped from the tree and in another moment was holding the fronds apart and staring curiously at me. I did not feel the same repugnance towards this creature which I had experienced in my encounter with the other beast men. You, he said, in the boat? He was a man, then, at least as much of a man as Montgomery's attendant, for he could talk. Yes, I said, I came in the boat. From the ship. Oh, he said, and his bright, restless eyes traveled over me, to my hands, to the stick I carried, to my feet, to the tattered places in my coat, and the cuts and scratches I had received from the thorns. He seemed puzzled at something. His eyes came back to my hands. He held his own hand out and counted his digits slowly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8. I did not grasp his meaning then. Afterwards, I was able to find that a great proportion of these beast people had malformed hands, lacking sometimes even 3 digits. But guessing this was in some way a greeting, I did the same thing by way of reply. He grinned with immense satisfaction. Then his swift roving glance went round again. He made a swift movement and vanished. The fern fronds he had stood between came swishing together. I pushed out of the break after him and was astonished to find him swinging cheerfully by one lank arm from a rope of creepers that looped down from the foliage overhead. His back was to me. "Hello?" said I. He came down with a twisting jump and stood facing me. "I say," said I, "where can I get something to eat?" "Eat," he said. "Eat man's food, now." And his eye went back to the swing of ropes. "At the huts." But where are the huts?" "Oh." I knew, you know. At that he swung round. and set off at a quick walk. All his motions were curiously rapid. "Come along," said he. I went with him to see the adventure out. I guessed the huts were some rough shelter where he and some more of these beast people lived. I might perhaps find them friendly, find some handle in their minds to take care of. I did not know how far they had forgotten their human heritage. My ape-like companion trotted along by my side, with his hands hanging down and his jaw thrust forward. I wondered what memory he might have in him. "How long have you been on this island?" said I. "How long?" he asked, and after having the question repeated, he held up 3 fingers. The creature was little better than an idiot. I tried to make out what he meant by that, and it seems I bored him. After another question or two, he suddenly left my side and went leaping at some fruits that hung from a tree. He pulled down a handful of prickly husks and went on eating the contents. I noted this with satisfaction, for here at least was a hint for feeding. I tried him with some other questions, but his chattering, prompt responses were as often as not quite as cross purposes with my question. Some few were appropriate, others quite parrot-like. I was so intent upon these peculiarities that I scarcely noticed the path he followed. Presently, we came to trees, all charred and brown, and so to a bare place covered with a yellow-white incrustation, across which a drifting smoke, pungent in whiffs to nose and eyes, went drifting. On our right, over a shoulder of bare rock, I saw the level blue of the sea. The path coiled down abruptly into a narrow ravine between 2 tumbled and knotty masses of blackish scoriae. Into this we plunged. It was extremely dark, this passage, after the blinding sunlight reflected from the sulphurous ground. Its walls grew steep and approached each other. Blotches of green and crimson drifted across my eyes. The conductor stopped suddenly. "Home," said he, and I stood in a floor of a chasm that was at first absolutely dark to me. I heard some strange noises and thrust the knuckles of my left hand into my eyes. I became aware of a disagreeable odor, like that of a monkey's cage ill-cleaned. Beyond, the rock opened again upon a gradual slope of sunlit greenery, and on either hand the light smote down through narrow ways into the central gloom. End of chapter 11. All right, chapter 11. So, we're scared. We're scared and we're afraid. And so we burst out of our home where we're staying, our enclosure, and we see that Montgomery is about to do something, and we assume that he's about to lock the outer door, making it impossible for us to leave. So we have this little stick with a nail in it, and so we just attack Montgomery. We're scratching up his face. We are just going wild and crazy. And Montgomery is like, "Stop, please." And so we run away, and we're like, "Oh, thank goodness we stopped him." And we're running in the forest. We're running, and we get to the point where no animal is following us. No person, no animal. We've outmaneuvered them. And we're sitting there. We don't know where we are, but we're sitting there, and then we look over and we see a face that we've actually recognized. We've seen it on the beach, and we're talking to this animal-human hybrid, and we're getting some information. Not very much, but some information. Like, he's been here a very long time. We learned that a lot of them have malformed hands, or we notice that later, that they have malformed hands and don't all have, all of their fingers, and some of them might not even have 3 of their fingers. And so we're asking for help. We're asking, help. And this creature doesn't have the same capabilities of when they were a human. Like, it seems like they are getting more and more animal-like in their mannerisms, but then also in their speech and their mental processes. So we ask for help. We ask how long they've been there, and then the creature just like leads us to a home, and it is too dark for us to see where we are or what we're doing, but he's saying you need to eat food, human food, in the huts, and we guess that might be where he led us. We don't really know. I am also concerned. Chapter 12. The Sayers of the Law. Then something cold touched my hand. I started violently and saw close to me a dim, pinkish thing, looking more like a flayed child than anything else in the world. The creature had exactly the mild but repulsive features of a sloth. The same low forehead and slow gestures. As the first shock of the change of light passed, I saw about me more distinctly. The little sloth-like creature was standing and staring at me. My conductor had vanished. The place was a narrow passage between high walls of lava, a crack in the knotted rock, and on either side interwoven heaps of sea mat. Palm fans and reeds leaning against the rock formed rough and impenetrably dark dens. The winding way up the ravine between these was scarcely 3 yards wide, and was disfigured by lumps of decaying fruit pulp and other refuse, which accounted for the disagreeable stench of the place. The little pink sloth creature was still blinking at me with my ape man when my ape man appeared at the aperture of the nearest of these dens and beckoned me in. As he did so, a slouching monster wriggled out of one of the places further up this strange street and stood up in featureless silhouette against the bright green beyond, staring at me. I hesitated, having half a mind to bolt the way I had come, and then, determined to go through with the adventure, I gripped my nailed stick about the middle and crawled into the little evil-smelling lean-to after my conductor. It was a semicircle space, shaped like the half of a beehive, and against the rocky wall that formed the inner side of it was a pile of variegated fruits, cocoa nuts among others. Some rough vessels of lava and wood stood about the floor, and one on a rough stool. There was no fire. In the darkest corner of the hut sat a shapeless mass of darkness that grunted, "Hey," as I came in. And my ape man stood in the dim light of the doorway and held out a split cocoa nut to me as I crawled into the other corner and squatted down. I took it and began gnawing it as serenely as possible, in spite of a certain trepidation and the nearly intolerable closeness of the den. The little pink sloth creature stood in the aperture of the hut, and something else with a drab face and bright eyes came staring over its shoulder. "Hey," came out of the lump of mystery opposite. "It is a man." "It is a man," gabbled my conductor. A man, a 5-man, like me." "Shut up," said the voice from the dark, and grunted. I gnawed my coconut amid an impressive stillness. I peered hard into the blackness, but could distinguish nothing. "It is a man," the voice repeated. "He comes to live with us." It was a thick voice with something in it, a kind of whistling overtone that struck me as peculiar, but the English accent was strangely good. The ape man looked at me as though he expected something. I perceived the pause was interrogative. He comes to live with you, I said. It is a man. He must learn the law. I began to distinguish now a deeper blackness in the black, a vague outline of a hunched-up figure. Then I noticed the opening of the place was darkened by 2 more heads. My hand tightened on my stick. The thing in the dark repeated in a louder tone, "Say the words." I had missed its last mark. "Now to go on all fours, that is the law," it repeated in a kind of sing-song. I was puzzled. "Say the words," said the ape man, repeating, and the figures in the doorway echoed this with a threat in the tone of their voices. I realized that I had to repeat this idiotic formula, and then began the insanest ceremony. The voice in the dark began intoning a mad litany, line by line, and I and the rest to repeat it. As they did so, they swayed from side to side in the oddest way and beat their hands upon their knees, and I followed their example. I could have imagined I was already dead and in another world. That dark hut, these grotesque, grim figures, just flecked here and there by a glimmer of light, and all of them swaying in unison and chanting, "Not to go on all fours, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to suck up drink, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to eat fish or flesh, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to claw the bark of trees, that is the law. Are we not men? Not to chase other men, that is the law. Are we not men?" And so, from the prohibition of these acts of folly, onto the prohibition of what I thought then were the maddest, most impossible, and most indecent things one could well imagine. A kind of rhythmic fervor fell on all of us. We gabbled and swayed faster and faster, repeating this amazing law. Superficially, the contagion of these brutes was upon me, but deep down within me, the laughter and disgust struggled together. We ran through a long list of prohibitions, and then the chant swung round to a new formula. His is the house of pain. His is the hand that makes. His is the hand that wounds. His is the hand that heals. And so on, for another long series, mostly quite incomprehensible gibberish to me about him, whoever he might be. I could have fancied it was a dream, but never before have I heard chanting in a dream. His is the lightning flash, we sang. His is the deep, salt sea. A horrible fancy came into my head that Moreau, after animalizing these men, had infected their dwarfed brains with a kind of deification of himself. However, I was too keenly aware of white teeth and strong claws about me to stop my chanting on that account. His are the stars in the sky. At last, that song ended. I saw the ape man's face shining with perspiration, and my eyes being now accustomed to the darkness, I saw more distinctly the figure in the corner from which the voice came. It was the size of a man, but it seemed covered with a dull gray hair, almost like a sky terrier. What was it? What were they all? Imagine yourself surrounded by all the most horrible maniacs it is possible to conceive, and you may understand a little of my feelings with these grotesque caricatures of humanity about me. "He is a five-man, a five-man, a five-man, like me," said the ape-man. I held out my hand. The gray creature in the corner leant forward. "Not to run on all fours, that is the law. Are we not men?" he said. He put out a strangely distorted talon and gripped my fingers. The thing was almost like the hoof of a deer produced into claws. I could have yelled with surprise and pain. His face came forward and peered at my nails, came forward into the light of the opening of the hut, and I saw with a quivering disgust that it was like the face of neither man nor beast, but a mere shock of gray hair, with 3 shadowy overarchings to mark the eyes and mouth. "He has nails," said this grisly creature in his hairy beard. "It is well." He threw my hand down, and instinctively I gripped my stick. "Eat roots and herbs. It is his will," said the ape-man. "I am the sayer of the law," said the gray man. "Here come all that be new to learn the law. I sit in the darkness and say the law." "It is even so," said one of the beasts in the doorway. "Evil are the punishments of those who break the law. None escape." "None escape," said the beast folk, glancing furtively at one another. None, said the ape-man. "None escape. See, I did a little thing, a wrong thing once. I jabbered, stopped talking. None could understand. I am burnt, branded in the hand. He is great. He is good." "None escape," said the gray creature in the corner. "None escape," said the beast people, looking askance at one another. "For everyone the want that is bad," said the gray sayer of the law. "What you will want we do not know. We shall know. Some want to follow things that move, to watch and slink and wait and spring, to kill and bite deep and rich, sucking the blood. It is bad not to chase other men. That is the law. We are we not men? Not to eat flesh or fish. That is the law. Are we not men?" "None escape," said a dappled brute standing in the doorway. "For every one the want is bad," said the gray sayer of the law. "Some want to go tearing with teeth and hands into the roots of things, snuffing into the earth. It is bad." "None escape," said the men in the door. "Some go clawing trees. Some go scratching at the graves of the dead. Some go fighting with foreheads or feet or claws. Some bite suddenly, none giving occasion. Some love uncleanness." "None escape," said the ape-man, scratching his calf. "None escape," said the little pink sloth creature. "Punishment is sharp and sure, therefore learn the law. Say the words." And incontinently, he began again the strange litany of the law, and again I and all these creatures began singing and swaying. My head reeled with this jabbering and the close stench of the place, but I kept on, trusting to find presently some chance of a new development. "Not to go on all fours, that is the law. Are we not men?" We were making such a noise that I noticed nothing of the tumult outside, until someone, who I think was one of the 2 swine men I had seen, thrust his head over the little pink sloth creature and shouted something excitedly. Something that I did not catch. Incontinently, those at the opening of the hut vanished. My ape-man rushed out. The thing that had sat in the dark followed him. I only observed that it was big and clumsy and covered with silvery hair, and I was left alone. Then before I reached the aperture, I heard the yelp of a staghound. In another moment, I was standing outside the hovel, my chair rail in my hand, every muscle of me quivering. Before me were the clumsy backs of perhaps a score of these beast people, their misshapen heads half ridden by their shoulder blades. They were gesticulating excitedly. Other half-animal faces glared interrogation out of the hovels, looking in the direction in which they faced. I saw coming through the haze under the trees, beyond the end of the passage of dens, the dark figure and awful white face of Moreau. He was holding the leaping staghound back, and close behind him came Montgomery, revolver in hand. For a moment I stood horror-struck. I turned and saw the passage behind me blocked by another heavy brute, with a huge gray face and twinkling little eyes advancing towards me. I looked round and saw to the right of me, a half-dozen yards in front of me, a narrow gap in the wall of rock through which a ray of light slanted into the shadows. "Stop!" cried Moreau as I strode towards this, and then, "Hold him." At that, first one face turned towards me, and then others. Their bestial minds were happily slow. I dashed my shoulder into a clumsy monster who was turning to see what Moreau meant and flung him forward into another. I felt his hands fly round, clutching at me and missing me. The little pink sloth creature dashed at me, and I gashed down its ugly face with the nail of my stick, and in another minute was scrambling up a steep side pathway, a kind of sloping chimney out of the ravine. I heard a howl behind me and cries of, "Catch him! Hold him!" And the gray-faced creature appeared behind me and jammed his huge bulk into the cleft. "Go on! Go on!" they howled. I clambered up the narrow cleft in the rock and came out upon the sulphur on the westward side of the village of the Beast Man. That gap was altogether fortunate for me, for the narrow chimney, slanting obliquely upward, must have impeded the nearer pursuers. I ran over the white space and down a steep slope, through a scattered growth of trees, and came to a low-lying stretch of tall reeds, through which I pushed into a dark, thick undergrowth that was black and succulent underfoot. As I plunged into the reeds, my foremost pursuers emerged from the gap. I broke my way through this undergrowth for some minutes. The air behind me and about me was soon full of threatening cries. I heard the tumult of my pursuers in the gap of the slope, then the crashing of the reeds, and every now and then the crackling crash of a branch. Some of the creatures roared like excited beasts of prey. The staghound yelped to the left. I heard Moreau and Montgomery shouting in the same direction. I turned sharply to the right. It seemed to me even then that I heard Montgomery shouting for me to run for my life. Presently, the ground gave rich and oozy under my feet, but I was desperate and went headlong into it, struggling through knee-deep, and so came to a winding path among tall canes. The noise of my pursuers passed away to my left. In one place, 3 strange, pink, hopping animals, about the size of cats, bolted before my footsteps. This pathway ran uphill, across another open space covered with white incrustation, and plunged into a canebrake again. Then suddenly it turned parallel with the edge of a steep-walled gap, which came without warning, like the ha-ha of an English park, turned with an unexpected abruptness. I was still running with all my might, and I never saw this drop until I was flying headlong through the air. I fell on my forearms and head, among thorns, and rose with a torn ear and bleeding face. I had fallen into a precipitous ravine, rocky and thorny, full of a hazy mist which drifted about me in wisps, and with a narrow streamlet from which this mist came meandering down the center. I was astonished at this thin fog in the full blaze of daylight, but I had no time to stand wondering then. I turned to my right, downstream, hoping to come to the sea in that direction and so have my way open to drown myself. It was only later I found that I had dropped my nailed stick in my fall. Presently the ravine grew narrower for a space, and carelessly I stepped into the stream. I jumped out again pretty quickly, for the water was almost boiling. I noticed, too, there was a thin, sulphurous scum drifting upon its coiling water. Almost immediately came a turn in the ravine, and the indistinct blue horizon. The nearer sea was flashing the sun from a myriad facet. I saw my death before me, but I was hot and panting, with the warm blood oozing out of my face and running pleasantly through my veins. I felt more than a touch of exultation, too, at having distanced my pursuers. It was not in me then to go out and drown myself yet. I stared back the way I had come. I listened, save for the hum of the gnats and the chirp of some small insects that hopped among the thorns. The air was absolutely still. Then came the yell of a dog, very faint, and a chattering and gibbering, the snap of a whip, and voices. They grew louder, then fainter again. The noise receded up the stream and faded away. For a while, the chase was over, but I knew now how much hope of help for me lay in the beast people. End of chapter 12. Ooh, okay, that was a good one. I enjoyed that one. Okay, so we were dropped off by our conductor in this dark, dank little place, and we can't really see, and figures are like outlines are emerging, and there's like a sloth-like creature. We have our ape man friend, and then there's another creature who deems himself as being the sayer of the law. And so in order to be accepted by this group, we also have to like go through with this ritual and song, and it's just a bunch of rules, just a bunch of laws that they're saying. I know the sayer of laws is saying laws. Who would have thought? But they're like sing-songing it, and it's just like never go on all fours. Are we not men? Never bite each other. Are we not men? Never chase each other. Are we not men? That type of thing. And then it also switches to he is the hand that helps. He is the hand that hurts. He is the hand that shelters, like that type of thing. And we're not quite sure. We think that maybe Moreau is like making himself into a deity after he changes all of these animals. But while all of this is happening, like we're joining the community, it seems like. But there's a hullabaloo outside, and it's Moreau, and he has some of his dogs there, and he is there to capture us and bring us back, presumably. And so we are a fright, and we're running to get away. And wouldn't you know it, we dropped our stick with a nail in it. But we do make it out, and to the point where like we don't hear anybody after us anymore. We don't really hear any sounds. In fact, it's really, really quiet except for like a few little bugs. And I'm excited. I'm enjoying this. There have been mentions a couple times of like, I'm gonna drown myself, but each time it's been like, no, not yet. So good on you, buddy. I forgot your first name. Edward? I'm assuming it's Edward. I feel like everybody's name is Edward. Chapter 13. A Parley. I turned again and went on down towards the sea. I found the hot stream broadened out to a shallow, weedy sand, in which an abundance of crabs and long-bodied, many-legged creatures started from my footfall. I walked to the very edge of the salt water, and then I felt I was safe. I turned and stared, arms akimbo, at the thick green behind me, into which the steamy ravine cut like a smoking gash. But, as I say, I was too full of excitement, and a true saying, though those who have never known danger may doubt it, too desperate to die. Then it came into my head that there was one chance before me yet. While Moreau and Montgomery and their bestial rabble chased me through the island, might I not go round the beach until I came to their enclosure? Make a flank march upon them, in fact, and then, with a rock lugged out of their loosely built wall, perhaps smash in the lock of the smaller door and see what I could find, knife, pistol, whatnot, to fight them with when they returned. It was at any rate something to try. So, I turned to the westward and walked along by the water's edge. The setting sun flashed his blinding heat into my eyes. The slight Pacific tide was running in with a gentle ripple. Presently, the shore fell away southward, and the sun came round upon my right hand. Then suddenly, far in front of me, I saw first one, and then several figures emerging from the bushes. Moreau, with his gray staghound, then Montgomery, and two others. At that, I stopped. They saw me, and began gesticulating and advancing. I stood watching them approach. The two beast men came running forward to cut me off from the undergrowth inland. Montgomery came, running also, but straight towards me. Moreau followed slower with the dog. At last I roused myself from my inaction and, turning seaward, walked straight into the water. The water was very shallow at first. I was 30 yards out before the waves reached to my waist. Dimly, I could see the intertidal creatures darting away from my feet. "What are you doing?" cried Montgomery. I turned, standing waist deep, and stared at him. Montgomery stood panting at the margin of the water. His face was bright red with exertion, his long flaxen hair blown about his head, and his dropping nether lip showed his irregular teeth. Moreau was just coming up, his face pale and firm, and the dog at his hand barked at me. Both men had heavy whips. Farther up the beach stared the beast man. "What am I doing? Am I going to drown myself?" said I. Montgomery and Moreau looked at each other. "Why?" asked Moreau. "Because that is better than being tortured by you." "I told you so," said Montgomery, and Moreau said something in a low tone. "What makes you think I shall torture you?" asked Moreau. "What I saw," I said. "And those, yonder—" "Hush," said Moreau, and held up his hand. "I will not," said I. "They were men. What are they now? I at least will not be like them." I looked past my interlocutors, up the beach, where Mling, Montgomery's attendant, and one of the white-swathed brutes from the boat. Farther up in the shadow of the trees I saw my little ape-man, and behind him some other dim figures. "Who are these creatures?" said I, pointing to them and raising my voice more and more that it might reach them. "They were men like yourselves, whom you have infected with some bestial taint, men whom you have enslaved and whom you still fear." "You who listen," I cried, pointing now to Moreau and shouting past him to the beastmen. "You who listen, do you not see these men still fear you? Go in dread of you? Why, then, do you fear them? You are many—" "For God's sake," cried Montgomery, "stop that, Prendick." "Prendick," cried Moreau. They both shouted together as if to drown my voice, and behind them lowered the staring faces of the beastmen, wondering, their deformed hands hanging down, their shoulders hunched up. They seemed, as I fancied, to be trying to understand me, to remember, I thought, something of their human past. I went on shouting. I scarcely remember what. That Moreau and Montgomery could be killed, that they were not to be feared. That was the burden of what I put into the heads of the beast people. I saw the green-eyed man in the dark rags, who had met me on the evening of my arrival, come out from among the trees, and others followed him, to hear me better. At last, for want of breath, I paused. "Listen to me for a moment," said the steady voice of Moreau, "and then say what you will." "Well?" said I. He coughed, thought, then shouted, "Latin, Prendick, bad Latin, schoolboy Latin, but try and understand. He non sunt homines, sunt animalia qui nos habemus." "Vivisected. A humanizing process. I will explain. Come ashore." I laughed. "A pretty story," said I. "They talk, build houses, they were men. It's likely I'll come ashore." "The water just beyond where you stand is deep, and full of sharks." "That's my way," said I, "short and sharp, presently." "Wait a minute." He took something out of his pocket that flashed back the sun and dropped the object at his feet. "That is a loaded revolver," said he. "Montgomery here will do the same. Now we are going up the beach until you are satisfied the distance is safe. Then come and take the revolvers. Not I, you have a third between you. I want you to think over things, Prendick. In the first place, I never asked you to come upon this island. If we vivisected men, we should import men, not beasts. In the next, we had you drugged last night. Had we wanted to work you any mischief. And in the next, now your first panic is over and you can think a little, is Montgomery here quite up to the character you give him? We have chased you for your good, because this island is full of inimical phenomena. Besides, why should we want to shoot you when you have just offered to drown yourself? Why did you set your people onto me when I was in the hut? We felt sure of catching you and bringing you out of danger. Afterwards, we drew away from the scent, for your good. I mused. It seemed just possible. Then I remembered something again. But I saw, said I, in the enclosure, that was a puma. Look here, Prendick, said Montgomery. You're a silly ass. Come out of the water and take these revolvers and talk. We can't do anything more than we could do now. I will confess that then, and indeed always, I distrusted and dreaded Moreau. But Montgomery was a man I felt I understood. Go up the beach, said I, after thinking, and added, holding your hands up. Can't do that, said Montgomery with an explanatory nod over his shoulder. Undignified. Go up the trees, then, said I, as you please. It's a damned silly ceremony, said Montgomery. Both turned and faced the 6 or 7 grotesque creatures who stood there in the sunlight, solid, casting shadows, moving, and yet so incredibly unreal. Montgomery cracked his whip at them, and forthwith they all turned and fled helter-skelter into the trees, and when Montgomery and Moreau were at a distance I judged sufficient, I waded ashore, and picked up and examined the revolvers. To satisfy myself against the subtlest trickery, I discharged one at a round lump of lava, and had the satisfaction of seeing the stone pulverized and the beach splashed with lead. Still, I hesitated a moment. I'll take the risk, said I, at last, and with a revolver in each hand, I walked up the beach toward them. That's better, said Moreau without affectation. As it is, you have wasted the best part of my day with your confounded imagination. And with a touch of contempt which humiliated me, he and Montgomery turned and went on in silence before me. The knot of beast men, still wondering, stood back among the trees. I passed them as serenely as possible. One started to follow me, but retreated again when Montgomery cracked his whip. The rest stood silent, watching. They may once have been animals, but I never before saw an animal trying to think. End of chapter 13. Ooh. Okay, so Moreau and Montgomery have cornered Prendick, and Prendick is like, I'll drown myself, and they're like, you're so silly. Why would you do that? There's sharks in there, and they're like, yeah, it'll be a quick death. Okay, but can you just come out of the water and we'll explain everything? And he's like, no, you're gonna hurt me. You're gonna hurt me. I know what you're doing here. They used to be people. What are you doing? And Moreau is like, if we were vivisecting people, don't you think that we would be having shiploads of people being brought here, not animals? And if we wanted to do you harm, we literally drugged you last night. We could have done you harm then. So you're being foolish. Come on. And we'll talk it out. So he does. He gets out of the water, he grabs the revolver, and he's following them back. And the next chapter is called Dr. Moreau Explains, and I am pumped. Oh, I'm so excited. Let's do it. I need a little sippy of water first. Little sip. Okay. Chapter 14. Dr. Moreau explains. And now, Prendick, I will explain, said Dr. Moreau, so soon as we had eaten and drunk. I must confess that you are the most dictatorial guest I ever entertained. I warn you that this is the last I shall do to oblige you. The next thing you threaten to commit suicide about, I shan't do, even at some personal inconvenience. He sat in my desk chair, a cigar half consumed in his white, dexterous-looking fingers. The light of the swinging lamp fell on his white hair. He stared through the little window out at the starlight. I sat as far away from him as possible, the table between us and the revolvers to hand. Montgomery was not present. I did not care to be with the two of them in such a little room. You admit that the vivisected human being, as you called it, is, after all, only the puma, said Moreau. He had made me visit that horror in the inner room to assure myself of its humanity. It is the puma, I said, still alive, but so cut and mutilated as I pray I may never see living flesh again. Of all vile... Never mind that, said Moreau. At least spare me those youthful horrors. Montgomery used to be just the same. You admit that it is the puma. Now be quiet while I reel off my physiological lecture to you. And forthwith, beginning in the tone of a man supremely bored, but presently warming a little, he explained his work to me. He was very simple and convincing. Now and then there was a touch of sarcasm in his voice. Presently I found myself hot with shame at our mutual positions. The creatures I had seen were not men, had never been men. They were animals, humanized animals, triumphs of vivisection. You forget all that a skilled vivisector can do with living things, said Moreau. For my own part, I'm puzzled why the things I have done here have not been done before. Small efforts, of course, have been made. Amputation, tongue-cutting, excision. Of course, you know a squint may be induced or cured by surgery. Then in the case of excisions, you have all kind of secondary changes, pigmentary disturbances, modifications of the passions, alterations in the secretion of fatty tissue. I've no doubt you have heard of these things. Of course, said I, but these foul creatures of yours, all in good time, said he, waving his hand at me. I am only beginning. Those are trivial cases of alteration. Surgery can do better things than that. There is building up as well as breaking down and changing. You have heard, perhaps, of a common surgical operation resorted to in cases where the nose has been destroyed. A flap of skin is cut from the forehead, turned down on the nose, and heals in the new position. This is a kind of grafting in a new position of part of an animal upon itself. Grafting of freshly obtained material from another animal is also possible. The case of teeth, for example. The grafting of skin and bone is done to facilitate healing. The surgeon places in the middle of the wound pieces of skin snipped from another animal, or fragments of bone from a victim freshly killed. Hunter's cockspur, possibly you have heard of that, flourished on the bull's neck, and the rhinoceros rats of the Algerian Juives are also to be thought of. Monsters manufactured by transferring a slip from the tail of an ordinary rat to its snout and allowing it to heal in that position. Monsters manufactured, said I. Then you mean to tell me... Yes, these creatures you have seen are animals carven and wrought into new shapes. To the study of the plasticity of living forms, my life has been devoted. I have studied for years, gaining in knowledge as I go. I see you look horrified, and yet I am telling you nothing new. It all lay in the surface of practical anatomy years ago, but no one had the temerity to touch it. It is not simply the outward form of an animal which I can change. The physiology, the chemical rhythm of the creature may also be made to undergo an enduring modification, of which vaccination and other methods of inoculation with living or dead matter are examples that will, no doubt, be familiar to you. A similar operation is the transfusion of blood, with which subjects, indeed, I began. These are all familiar cases. Less so, and probably far more extensive, were the operations of those medieval practitioners who made dwarves and beggar cripples, show monsters, some vestiges of whose art still remain in the preliminary manipulations of the young mountebank or contortionist. Victor Hugo gives an account of them in L'Homme qui rit, but perhaps my meaning grows plain now. You begin to see that it is a possible thing to transplant tissue from one part of an animal to another, or from one animal to another, to alter its chemical reactions and methods of growth, to modify the articulations of its limbs, and indeed to change it in its most intimate structure. And yet this extraordinary branch of knowledge has never been sought as an end and systematically by modern investigators until I look it up. Some such things have been hit upon in the last resort of surgery. Most of the kindred evidence that will recur to your mind has been demonstrated, as it were, by accident, by tyrants, by criminals, by the breeders of horses and dogs, by all kinds of untrained, clumsy-handed men working for their own immediate ends. I was the first man to take up this question armed with antiseptic surgery and with a really scientific knowledge of the laws of growth. Yet one would imagine it must have been practiced in secret before. Such creatures as the Siamese twins, and in the vaults of the Inquisition. No doubt their chief aim was artistic torture, but some at least of the inquisitors must have had a touch of scientific curiosity. But, said I, these animals talk. He said that was so, and proceeded to point out that the possibility of vivisection does not stop at a mere physical metamorphosis. A pig may be educated. The mental structure is even less determined than the bodily. In our growing science of hypnotism, we find the promise of a possibility of superseding old inherent instincts by new suggestions, grafting upon or replacing the inherited fixed ideas. Very much indeed of what we call moral education, he said, is such an artificial modification and perversion of instinct. Pugnacity is trained into courageous self-sacrifice, and suppressed sexuality into religious emotion. And the great difference between man and monkey is in the larynx, he continued, in the incapacity to frame delicately different sound symbols by which thought could be sustained. In this I failed to agree with him, but with a certain incivility he declined to notice my objection. He repeated that the thing was so, and continued his account of his work. I asked him why he had taken the human form as a model. There seemed to me then, and there, still seems to me now, a strange wickedness for that choice. He confessed that he had chosen that form by chance. I might just as well have worked to form sheep into llamas and llamas into sheep. I suppose there is something in the human form that appeals to the artistic turn of mind more powerfully than any animal shape can. But I've not confined myself to man-making, once or twice. He was silent. For a minute, perhaps. These years, how they have slipped by, and here I have wasted a day saving your life, and am now wasting an hour explaining myself. But, said I still do not understand. Where is your justification for inflicting all this pain? The only thing that could excuse vivisection to me would be some application. Precisely, said he. But you see, I am differently constituted. We are on different platforms. You are a materialist. I am not a materialist, I began hotly. In my view, for it is just this question of pain that parts us. So long as visible or audible pain turns you sick, so long as your own pain drives you, so long as pain underlies your propositions about sin, so long, I tell you, you are an animal, thinking a little less obscurely what an animal feels. This pain... I gave an impatient shrug at such sophistry. Oh, but it is such a little thing. A mind truly open to what science has to teach must see that it is a little thing. It may be that save in this little planet, this speck of cosmic dust, invisible long before the nearest star could be attained, it may be, I say, that nowhere else does this thing called pain occur. But the laws we feel our way towards, why, even on this earth, even among living things, what pain is there? As he spoke, he drew a little penknife from his pocket, opened the smaller blade, and moved his chair so that I could see his thigh. Then, choosing the place deliberately, he drove the blade into his leg and withdrew it. No doubt, he said, you have seen that before. It does not hurt a pinprick. But what does it show? The capacity for pain is not needed in the muscle, and it is not placed there, is but little needed in the skin, and only here and there over the thigh is a spot capable of feeling pain. Pain is simply our intrinsic medical advisor to warn us and stimulate us. Not all living flesh is painful, nor is all nerve, not even all sensory nerve. There's no taint of pain, real pain, in the sensations of the optic nerve. If you wound the optic nerve, you merely see flashes of light, just as disease of the auditory nerve merely means a humming in our ears. Plants do not feel pain, nor the lower animals. It's possible that such animals as the starfish and crayfish do not feel pain at all. Then with men, the more intelligent they become, the more intelligently they will see after their own welfare, and the less they will need the goad to keep them out of danger. I never yet heard of a useless thing that was not ground out of existence by evolution sooner or later. Did you? And pain gets needless. Then I am a religious man, Prendick. As every sane man must be, it may be, I fancy, that I have seen more of the ways of this world's maker than you, for I have sought his laws in my way all my life, while you, I understand, have been collecting butterflies, and I tell you, pleasure and pain have nothing to do with heaven or hell. Pleasure and pain. Bah! What is your theologian's ecstasy? What Mahomet's ori in the dark? This store which men and women set on pleasure and pain, Prendick, is the mark of the beast upon them, the mark of the beast from which they came. Pain, pain and pleasure, they are for us only so long as we wriggle in the dust. You see, I went on with this research just the way it led me. That is the only way I ever heard of true research going. I asked a question, devised some method of obtaining an answer, and got a fresh question. Was this possible, or that possible? You cannot imagine what this means to an investigator, what an intellectual passion grows upon him. You cannot imagine the strange, colorless delight of these intellectual desires. The thing before you is no longer an animal, a fellow creature, not a problem. Sympathetic pain. All I know of it, I remember as a thing I used to suffer from years ago. I wanted, it was the one thing I wanted, to find out the extreme limit of plasticity in a living shape. But, I said, the thing is an abomination. To this day I have never troubled about the ethics of the matter, he continued. The study of nature makes a man at last as remorseless as nature. I have gone on, not heeding anything but the question I was pursuing, and the material has dripped into the huts yonder. It is nearly 11 years since we came here, I and Montgomery and 6 Kanakas. I remember the green stillness of the island and the empty ocean about us, as though it was yesterday. The place seemed waiting for me. The stores were landed, and the house was built. The Kanakas founded some huts near the ravine. I went to work here upon what I had brought with me. There were some disagreeable things happened at first. I began with a sheep, and killed it after a day and a half by a slip of the scalpel. I took another sheep, and made a thing of pain and fear, and left it bound up to heal. It looked quite human to me when I had finished it, but when I went to it, I was discontented with it. It remembered me, and was terrified beyond imagination, and it had no more than the wits of a sheep. The more I looked at it, the clumsier it seemed, until at last I put the monster out of its misery. These animals without courage, these fear-haunted, pain-driven things, without a spark of pugnacious energy to face torment, they're no good for man-making. Then I took a gorilla I had, and upon that, working with infinite care and mastering difficulty after difficulty, I made my first man. All the week, night and day, I molded him. With him it was chiefly the brain that needed molding. Much had to be added, much changed. I thought him a fair specimen of his type when I had finished him, and he lay bandaged, bound, and motionless before me. It was only when his life was assured that I left him and came into this room again, and found Montgomery much as you are. He had heard some of the cries as the thing grew human, cries like those that disturbed you so. I didn't take him completely into my confidence at first, and the Kanakas, too, had realized something of it. They were scared out of their wits by the sight of me. I got Montgomery over to me, in a way, but I and he had the hardest job to prevent the Kanakas deserting. Finally, they did, and so we lost the yacht. I spent many days educating the brute. Together, I had him for 3 or 4 months. I taught him the rudiments of English, gave him ideas of counting, even made the thing read the alphabet. But at that he was slow, though I've met with idiots slower. He began with a clean sheet, mentally, had no memories left in his mind of what he had been. When his scars were quite healed and he was no longer anything but painful and stiff and able to converse a little, I took him yonder and introduced him to the Kanakas as an interesting stowaway. They were horribly afraid of him at first, somehow, which offended me rather, for I was conceited about him, but his way seemed so mild, and he was so abject that after a time they received him and took his education in hand. He was quick to learn, very imitative and adaptive, and built himself a hovel rather better, it seemed to me, than their own shanties. There was among the boys a bit of a missionary, and he taught the thing to read, or at least to pick out letters, and give him some rudimentary ideas of morality. But it seems the beast's habits were not all that desirable. I rested from work for some days after this, and was in a mind to write an account of the whole affair to wake up English physiology. Then I came upon the creature squatting up in a tree and gibbering at two of the Kanakas who had been teasing him. I threatened him, told him the inhumanity of such a proceeding, aroused his sense of shame, and came home resolved to do better before I took my work back to England. I have been doing better, but somehow the things drift back again. The stubborn beast flesh grows day by day back again, but I mean to do better things still. I mean to conquer that. This puma... But that's the story. All the Kanaka boys are dead now. One fell overboard of the launch, and one died of a wounded heel that he poisoned in some way with plant juice. 3 went away in the yacht, and I suppose and hope were drowned. The other one was killed. Well, I have replaced them. Montgomery went on much as you are disposed to do at first, and then... What became of the other one? Said I sharply. The other Kanaka who was killed. The fact is, after I had made a number of human creatures, I made a thing. He hesitated. Yes, said I. It was killed. I don't understand, said I. Do you mean to say it killed the Kanaka? Yes, it killed several other things that it caught. We chased it for a couple days. It only got loose by accident. I never meant it to get away. It wasn't finished. It was purely an experiment. It was a limbless thing with a horrible face that writhed along the ground in a serpentine fashion. It was immensely strong and in infuriating pain. It lurked in the woods for some days until we hunted it, and then it wriggled into the northern part of the island, and we divided the party to close in upon it. Montgomery insisted upon coming with me. The man had a rifle, and when his body was found, one of the barrels was curved into the shape of an S, and very nearly bitten through. Montgomery shot the thing. After that, I stuck to the ideal of humanity, except for little things. He became silent. I sat in silence, watching his face. So for 20 years altogether, counting 9 years in England, I have been going on, and there is still something in everything I do that defeats me, makes me dissatisfied, challenges me to further effort. Sometimes I rise above my level, sometimes I fall below it, but always I fall short of the things I dream. The human shape I can get now, almost with ease, so that it is lithe and graceful, or thick and strong, but often there is trouble with the hands and the claws, painful things that I dare not shape too freely. But it is in the subtle grafting and reshaping one must needs do to the brain that my trouble lies. The intelligence is often oddly low, with an unaccountable blank ends, unexpected gaps, and least satisfactory of all is something that I cannot touch. Somewhere, I cannot determine where, in the seat of the emotions, cravings, instincts, desires that harm humanity, a strange hidden reservoir to burst forth suddenly and inundate the whole being of the creature with anger, hate, or fear. These creatures of mine seemed strange and uncanny to you so soon as you began to observe them, but to me, just after I make them, they seem to be indisputably human beings. It's afterwards, as I observe them, that the persuasion fades. First one animal trait, then another, creeps to the surface and stares out at me. But I will conquer yet. Each time I dip a living creature into the bath of burning pain, I say, this time I will burn out all the animal. This time I will make a rational creature of my own. After all, what is 10 years? Men have been 100,000 in the making, he thought darkly. But I am drawing near the fastness, this puma of mine, after a silence. And they revert. As soon as my hand is taken from them, the beast begins to creep back, begins to assert itself again. Another long silence. Then you take the things you make into those dens, said I. They go. I turn them out when I begin to feel the beast in them, and presently they wander there. They all dread this house and me. There is a kind of travesty of humanity over there. Montgomery knows about it, for he interferes in their affairs. He has trained one or two of them to our service. He's ashamed of it, but I believe he half likes some of those beasts. It's his business, not mine. They only sicken me with a sense of failure. I take no interest in them. I fancy they follow in the lines of the Kanaka missionary marked out, and have a kind of mockery of a rational life. Poor beasts. There's something they call the law. Sing hymns about all thine. They build themselves their dens, gather fruit and pull herbs, marry even. But I can see through it all, see into their very souls, and see they're nothing but the souls of beasts, beasts that perish, anger, and the lusts to live and gratify themselves. Yet they're odd, complex, like everything else alive. There is a kind of upward striving in them, part vanity, part waste sexual emotion, part waste curiosity. It only mocks me. I have some hope of this puma. I have worked hard at her head and brain. And now, said he, standing up after a long gap of silence, during which he had each pursued our own thoughts, what do you think? Are you in fear of me still? I looked at him and saw but a white-faced, white-haired man with calm eyes, save for his serenity, the touch almost of beauty that resulted from his set tranquility and his magnificent build. He might have passed muster among 100 other comfortable old men. Then I shivered. By way of answer to his second question, I handed him a revolver with either hand. Keep them, he said, and snatched at a yawn. He stood up, stared at me for a moment, and smiled. You have had 2 eventful days, said he. I should advise some sleep. I'm glad it's all clear. Good night. He thought me over for a moment, then went out by the inner door. I immediately turned the key in the outer one. I sat down again, sat for a time in a kind of stagnant mood, so weary, emotionally, mentally, and physically, that I could not think beyond the point of which he had left me. The black window stared at me like an eye. At last, with an effort, I put out the light and got into the hammock. Very soon, I was asleep. End of chapter 15. Ooh. That's fun. Or end of chapter 14, excuse me. Okay, so chapter 14, we actually get the explanation from Dr. Moreau himself. And he is just going on and saying, like, you've heard of vivisection. You've heard of plastic surgery. You've heard of skin grafting, right? I know you have. You're a man of science. I know you've heard of things. What if I was to tell you that I'm just doing the same thing, but a little bit more extreme? What if I was to tell you that I am making animals into humans? Kind of. And it is just so wild. And we have questions, and we're like, but abominations. And he's like, I don't care about ethics. And it's like, okay, but like, they're in pain. It's like, pain is a human thing. Animals don't feel pain. Okay, you sociopath. My word. So it's just so interesting to see it from his perspective. And anytime you have like a doctor or a scientist who is just like, what if we did more? It's always that, like, you know, question of like, never questioned whether I could or whether I should. That, you know the quote from Jurassic Park. You know it. PETA is coming for him. Exactly. So, and also something that's interesting is the animals that he works on, as soon as he's like done, they start to revert back to animals instead, and like losing their like human qualities. And so when they turn into like more beast, like revert back to more beast than human, he like sets them free, and then they go and they have like made their own little community. Whew. I am loving this. I'm loving it so much. Also, I think he's only on the island, at least from what I'm trying to remember from the very beginning, like the intro, I think he's only there for like 3 or 4 days. So it's gonna end. I mean, we already know that it's gonna end soon, but like his time there is gonna end very soon. So I feel like it's just gonna keep like, it's gonna like escalate so much to like a pitch, and then it's just gonna be like, and the end. So we'll see. So yes, thank you all so much. It was a pleasure. As always, whether you lurk, whether you chat, I 1000% appreciate you, and I 1000% appreciate your support. If I don't see you next time, I hope to see you very soon. Bye.